Harry's Wife, Part 71.5. The Death Stare. I've spoken elsewhere about the use of the narcissist stare in a video surprisingly entitled The Narcissist Stare, and I explain the different uses and dynamics where it appears. The narcissist stare that you are most familiar with is that which conveys hatred, a baleful glare that exhibits envy, antipathy, and hatred. In some instances, it will be utilized for the purposes of intimidating the recipient in order to cause them to react. It's a form of provocation that is being done as a malign form of the assertion of control and to draw fuel, invariably negative, from the recipient. In some instances, of course, an aware narcissist knows that the stare is being used for that purpose, to intimidate, to frighten, to scare, to ensure that control is obtained or maintained, and to draw fuel from the relevant individual. With an unaware narcissist, they don't know the reasons they're doing. They know that they're staring hatefully at an individual, but they don't know that it's being driven by their narcissism. They don't know that it's being done for the purpose of gaining that control and drawing fuel. They will be caused to believe that the recipient deserves it, that the recipient has done something that merits staring at them in such a harsh and hurtful manner. The narcissism will convince them that the individual has transgressed in some way which merits being the recipient of such a stare, and it will be generated by feelings of hatred or envy or jealousy on the part of the narcissist. In other instances, the stare manifests as a moment of almost unguardedness where the narcissism allows it to show, and to the keen observer, one is able to note it occurring and, of course, what it denotes. In some instances, the stare may not be witnessed by a potential recipient. Those individuals are looking elsewhere, engrossed in something else, or have their back to the individual that is conducting the stare. In those circumstances, the stare isn't being utilized to assert control because nobody's witnessing it, or, if it is, it's failing because nobody's noticed it. And often what happens is that it is a moment whereby the facade slips just for a moment, because the overwhelming need to achieve that control causes the facade to break away. As I've mentioned in an earlier section of Part 71, where there is a conflict between the necessity of drawing control and fuel and the maintenance of the facade falls away. Sometimes it is for a mere microsecond, and it is only the keenest of observers that see it, a sudden switching from a smile to the stare, and then back to a smile. It's there and then it's gone. In other instances, it lingers as the hatred and envy emanates. As people often comment, if looks could kill, the stink eye, the death stare. There are numerous instances where Harry's wife has utilized the stare, sometimes directly towards somebody, more often in instances where her narcissism, fighting to seek control, and the facade not being able to maintain, in effect allows it to be seen for a moment in time. In effect, it can't cover up that boiling hatred, the ignited fury that is always beneath the surface, and that manifests as what is known as cold fury. There's no shouting, no screaming, no physical violence, but the cold, unwavering, reptilian, baleful stare of the narcissist, that cold fury surging from them as a consequence of being wounded or challenged. Either way, there is a threat to control. Many people send me photographs, some of which I'm not going to tell you about the content today, a little bit spicy for you. But in many instances, people send me a photograph and they ask, HG, is this person a narcissist? Now, of course, from one photograph you can't tell, because a photograph is a moment frozen in time and can be open to interpretation. It might be that the individual was yawning or blinking or such like, and therefore their face is framed in a particular manner. However, if someone was to send me repeated photographs of a particular individual, then we see a pattern of responses, frozen in time, which become more determinative. Accordingly, sending one photo and asking HG, is this person a narcissist, will be met with me saying, it's merely an indicator. What appear to be dead eyes and that frozen rictus grin may well denote that there is a narcissist, but we can't determine it from just one photograph. We need a range of them, alongside of other information also, of course. Invariably, the stiffened poise, the clenching of the jaw, perhaps the forming of a fist or a claw, the dead eyes, in other instances that fixed rictus grin, are indeed indicators, and if we see them in picture after picture after picture of a particular individual, it forms a pattern, and from a pattern we can form a determination alongside the other evidence. Now, of course, having established from lots of other evidence, both private and public, that our subject is a narcissist, as I've explained to you before, this enables us then to look at various instances through that prism of narcissism to interpret it. And this is applicable to all narcissists. You must review the evidence over a period of time, substantial evidence, and then form a view. And that's what the narc detector does. That's what my expertise does. And once we've formed a solid view with a high evidential threshold, we can then interpret the individual's behaviours accordingly. If they're found to be a narcissist, we can then interpret what they say, what they do, what they don't say, what they don't do, through that prism. Here, we've already established that our subject is a narcissist, and thus we interpret the behaviours accordingly. There are a mass of photographs available online that incorporate Harry's wife's death stare, but I've chosen 4 examples to talk you through, so that we can see it in action, and for me to give you the analysis on each one. Our first photograph, showing Harry's wife's death stare in action, takes place at the Inskip wedding. Sat at the table is an unidentified brunette who is engaged in earnest conversation with the ginger prince. There's some beverages on the table and, rather strangely, a pineapple. Or maybe it's a hidden device. And sat to the right, lounging on her chair, is Harry's wife. As you can see from the picture, unidentified brunette is looking straight at the ginger prince. Perhaps she has some magic beans in her hand, telling him, swallow them and she'll disappear. Or she's making a point with a gesticulation. Either way, her body language tells us that she's engrossed in conversation with the ginger prince. Harry, hair tousled and a little red of face, is looking intently back at her. There is a line of communication between unidentified brunette and the ginger prince. Harry's wife sits outside this dynamic, and it shows. Harry's fuel is going to unidentified brunette. Unidentified brunette's fuel is going to Harry. Neither of those individuals are narcissists and therefore don't need the fuel. However, Harry's wife is not involved, and therefore she is wounded. Nobody is giving her fuel. Nobody is giving her control. The fact that they are talking essentially amongst themselves, even if it is for a matter of moments, makes her feel excluded. Undoubtedly, they are not purposefully excluding her. Perhaps she has just sat down again, having been to the bathroom, and they were already involved in a conversation, and they haven't turned to acknowledge her. Or perhaps she was talking to somebody else who has departed the table, and they're continuing on their own private conversation. Nevertheless, that doesn't matter to the narcissist, because neither of them are acknowledging her, and therefore that threatens her control. And in her unconscious, this tells her that she's unimportant. It embodies a sense of weakness, vulnerability, feeling powerless, that she doesn't matter. And therefore the narcissism scrambles into action to motivate her and to galvanize her to take action to deal with this wounding. Her fuel levels start to plummet as, in effect, she's holed below the waterline, fuel spilling from her, and dependent upon existing fuel levels, she might well plummet towards a fuel crisis. The fact that she is wounded shows, writ large upon her face, the baleful stare directed towards an identified brunette, seething, the hatred, the mouth set straight, the eyes focused, the baleful stare, the death stare, surging from her. The thoughts will be, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are talking to him? He's mine. There may be criticisms of the woman's dress, her makeup, her looks, all churning around in that head as the envy and hatred flows. This is all done to motivate the narcissist to take some steps to assert control. Ordinarily, it would be to try and do so directly by interrupting, by tugging on the sleeve of Harry and saying, in effect, talk to me, acknowledge me, make me feel important. But at that particular moment, before the steps are taken to assert that control, either directly, indirectly, or perhaps by staying withdrawal, although I see that to be unlikely in this instance, the baleful glare appears. The narcissism causes her to look in such an unpleasant manner towards this individual, the hatred and the envy spewing from her before the next step is taken to assert that control, and it is a momentary glimpse that enables us to understand what is churning beneath the surface, that cold fury, that visceral hatred towards the individual who is occupying Prince Harry's thoughts and attention, when they ought to be rightfully, of course, directed towards Harry's wife. And that is an excellent representation of a dynamic between three people where the narcissist feels excluded, albeit unlikely to be intentional by the other participants in the conversation, and the resultant wounding and the ignition of cold fury that we see. The next incident of the death stare in action involves Harry's wife's nemesis, the Duchess of Cambridge. The Duchess of Cambridge bagged the main prize. She married the man who will become the King of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. She will become Queen. She ranks ahead of Harry's wife. On numerous occasions, at events and formal occasions, she has processed ahead of Harry's wife. And of course that causes wounding, because again it signals to the narcissist that she is not as important as this individual. There have been instances reported of how Harry's wife has flirted and made eyes at William, not recognising the boundaries, acting through that sense of entitlement. And because the Duchess of Cambridge is well regarded, well liked, her empathy flowing, that people gravitate towards her because of a degree of natural magnetism, and of course that she married the future King of England, then there is much for Harry's wife to be envious of. Of course other people would think, you've married into the royal family, you live in a huge mansion, you have your health, all these other things. But no, none of that matters, because every time the Duchess of Cambridge appears, she reminds Harry's wife that she's second best. And the Duchess of Cambridge is painted black. And every time she makes an appearance, everything that she does is interpreted through that lens of black by Harry's wife's narcissism. And here in this picture, the two ladies, and I believe that the shoulder that we see was that of Prince Harry in a wider lens photograph of this moment, were at some kind of on-stage event. And we can see that Kate, slightly out of focus, is listening to, no doubt, somebody speaking. Her eyes, the position of them, point towards where the speaker is. But Harry's wife isn't looking that way. She's looking into the back of the Duchess of Cambridge's head. There's a slightly smug look about the face, as if she's thinking dark and delicious thoughts about driving a rusty meat hook into Kate's head, or perhaps staging a dirty protest in one of her chambers. We see the slight curling of the mouth and the dead eyes, staring, baleful, arrogant, haughty. Doubtless there is a moment of wounding. The fact that someone might be talking to the Duchess of Cambridge, and therefore, because they are not talking to Harry's wife, she's wounded by it. This threatens her sense of control, and the cold fury is ignited. The facade dictates that she can't jump up and pull Kate by the hair, slapping her about the chops in some Duchess on Duchess smackdown action. That couldn't happen. She can't blurt an insult at her. That would damage the facade too greatly, and instead her narcissism opts by the assertion of control by remaining in a position of withdrawal and no doubt thinking hateful thoughts about the Duchess of Cambridge, thinking of doing her down, thinking of unpleasant things to do to her, perhaps mocking her for being too thin or for being too English or such like. It doesn't really matter. The narcissism engenders the cold fury. It causes the hatred and the envy, and it causes the thoughts whereby the narcissist, asserting control in a position of withdrawal, essentially thinks in this manner: I hate you, I'm better than you, and thus dispenses and jettisons, and thus feels in control. What we see there is a look which is both baleful, but it shows that those dark and evil thoughts are being thought about Kate. This is the third assertion of control in action, but again manifests with the dead-eyed, baleful look towards the nemesis, and is another instructive view of the death stare in action. And so to death stare 3, an older photograph which I believe is taken at Wimbledon. Once again it features Harry's wife's nemesis, the Duchess of Cambridge. The Duchess of Cambridge is walking down some stairs, smile upon her face, engaging eye contact with somebody, and no doubt is being greeted. Of course she leads the way, and once again Harry's wife has to follow, relegated to the position of number 2, not that she feels that she should be there. And in that moment we see the vacant look upon her face as she stares into the back of the Duchess of Cambridge. She's not looking around smiling at the audience. Remember, she's on display. But of course, where are all eyes going? Towards the Duchess of Cambridge, and not on her. In her world, they ought to be looking at Queen Harry's wife, but they're not. They're focused upon her nemesis, the charming and radiant Duchess of Cambridge. The envy arises once again, because it wounds. The fuel is going towards the Duchess of Cambridge, not that she needs it, she isn't a narcissist. But in the world of the narcissist, that is wasted fuel. Her unconscious narcissism recognises that that fuel ought to be coming to that individual, and because eyes are elsewhere, this wounds. Once again, the narcissist feels small, weak, vulnerable, powerless, and the narcissism has to jump into action to protect the narcissist through asserting control. But in that moment we see the initial stage of the wounding, the inability to look around and enjoy the occasion, because the occasion can't be enjoyed for itself. It can only be enjoyed through the receipt of the prime aims. An occasion is enjoyed by being well fueled and being controlled. The individuals within it causes an enjoyment for the narcissist whereby character traits and residual benefits are recorded. The narcissist doesn't just enjoy something for its own sake. It can only be enjoyed through the receipt of the prime aims. And here, for a moment, we see the reaction to being wounded. Staring into the back again of the Duchess of Cambridge's head, no doubt the first baleful thoughts emerging. Thoughts quite possibly about shoving her in the back and sending her sprawling down to the bottom of the stairs. Not, of course, that could be done. The facade dictates that it's not allowed. On that console, in Narcissist HQ, the facade light is flashing, which locks off certain manipulations. So she can't shove her in the back, or suddenly again grab some of those long flowing brunette locks and yank them back whilst chewing on her ear, Mike Tyson style. No. Instead, the narcissism has to take an alternative route. Through cold fury, it causes the hate-filled and envious-minded thoughts to emerge, and doubtless there'll be such thoughts as, look at her, she's loving all of this, she thinks she's better than me, she thinks she's so important to all of these individuals. Well, I'm better than she is. One day I will be queen. I'm only a plane crash away from that happening. These dark thoughts are repeatedly present with our kind. We may not act on them, but they're generated by our narcissism to cause us to be motivated to either do something or to at least sit there and jettison the individual by staying in a position of withdrawal. The facade dictates that we may not be able to do anything directly, that we can't punch that person, that we can't gouge their eyes out, that we can't lambast them with our acid tongs. Of course, away from the views of others, away from the presence of the facade, this is what happens. And those of you who are familiar with such situations, invariably as intimate partner primary sources in devaluation, will have experienced the vitriol and hatred of the narcissist behind closed doors. But the facade generally dictates that can't emerge in public, and therefore a direct assertion of control, which is malign, is locked off. The facade won't let it happen. Indirect assertion of control isn't appropriate here. There's nobody that Harry's wife could turn to and smear. She could do so afterwards. So in this moment, all she can do is stay within withdrawal and not engage. And to cause her to do that, the narcissism preoccupies her by making her feel envious and causing her to feel hatred towards the Duchess of Cambridge, and to preoccupy her mind with thoughts of malevolence, of criticising, of insulting, of thinking bad and unpleasant thoughts about the Duchess of Cambridge. And once again, the death stare is emerging and provides us with another useful analysis of how narcissism operates with regard to a prominent individual. And so to our final example of the death stare. As I've mentioned, there are many other examples littered all across the internet, and one could spend considerable hours picking up each one and analysing it. They demonstrate the pattern, but I selected 4 from that pattern for the purposes of analysis and helping you understand what is occurring with regard to Harry's wife, and more generally so that you can link it to your own experiences. Here we see the back of guess who, the nemesis, the Duchess of Cambridge's head, and sat opposite her, Harry's wife. And there we see the death stare. It causes the eyes to go black. In this instance, we don't know where the Duchess of Cambridge is looking. She may be looking away. Undoubtedly, she probably is. She will be aware of the look that she is receiving and will probably be looking towards the crowd because this is a public occasion. Once again, notwithstanding that this is in public, the narcissism is such because it's fighting to get control, because no doubt feeling that she's playing number 2, second fiddle to the Duchess of Cambridge once again when she thinks that she should be top dog, driven by her sense of entitlement, lack of boundary recognition and absence of accountability. Wounding occurs. This time we see the narrowing of the eyes, a piercing, baleful death stare towards the Duchess of Cambridge. In this instance, it might be that it's being done specifically to try and draw her attention, to intimidate her, to prompt a response. So, for instance, she asks, is everything all right? And if she were to do so, she would give Harry's wife some fuel, and it would signal that she's under control. I suspect that at this point the Duchess of Cambridge has become well versed in some of the behaviours of Harry's wife, and will either be distracted by looking at the crowd or doing her utmost not to engage with her, and to not give her the satisfaction of responding to the death stare. But is there for all to see. There's no mistaking it. This time the eyes have narrowed, causing them to go dark, the blackness within pouring forth, fixed, rigid, trying to hold the prey in its gaze in order to make it submit to her will, to cause her to offer up that fuel, to signal that she is under control. This example, of course, has been caught by a photograph and shows also the mid-ranger's lack of awareness and the collateral consequence. A more skilled narcissist, the greater ultra, would never be seen in public doing something like this because they would be aware that it could be photographed or filmed, and therefore in the circumstances would save such behaviour to an appropriate circumstance and another occasion where nobody would see it, or at least where there was no filming taking place. But here, the narcissism is only concerned about control in the moment and isn't having any regard to collateral consequences. Again, another piece of evidence that demonstrates that there is no overarching planning on the part of the Duchess of Sussex, but instead Harry's wife operates very much in the moment, unaware of why she does all of these things, believing that she does these things for different reasons, not aware that she does it to assert control, not aware that she does it for the purposes of trying to draw fuel, residual benefits and character traits. She doesn't have any thoughts that this might be captured by camera and make her look less than pleasant towards the fragrant Duchess of Cambridge. She has no regard that it gives ammunition to her detractors to say, look at the envy written large over her face. Look at the way that she again is looking at the Duchess of Cambridge, hate-filled, envious. The narcissist simply doesn't care about that, because if those allegations were put to her, it would simply deny them. That never happened. Or provide a different interpretation as to why she's looking the way that she is. The sun was shining in my eyes, and therefore I had to narrow my eyes. I wasn't looking at the Duchess of Cambridge, I was looking past her. No accountability, no acceptance of the allegation. The narcissism is always able to deny as the first line of the narcissistic defense, and if that fails, to move to another one. Control will always be obtained in some way through the assertions of control. 4 photographs, 4 excellent examples of the death stare in example, or rather in action, and to enable you to understand the dynamics behind each and every one of them. Use this information well. There are others elsewhere upon the internet and YouTube, etc., who've commented upon these death stares. They just put it down to envy, and they put it down to hatred, but they're only partially correct. It is only through my analysis that you really understand what's going on beneath the surface, what really drives all of these behaviours. And I would invite you to disseminate these videos to those forums and places to enable people to gain that greater understanding, both of the behaviour of Harry's wife, but also of human beings and narcissists more generally, so that they start to understand what they're dealing with. Rather than put forward their general theories about the hatred and what it's based upon, give them the actual information. Give them the answers. Share these videos. Thank you in advance for doing so. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.